Colleagues, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. My name is Karin Wolff and I'm the Teaching and Learning Advisor and Senior Researcher in the Stellenbosch University Faculty of Engineering. And I'm going to start by directly addressing the conference theme. I believe that one of the key roles for research universities in our context is to problematize, both conceptually and contextually, the notion of STEM in Africa for the 21st century. And I'm going to be offering you a research and empirically informed approach to STEM education for Africa in the 21st century. Now, the problem of STEM education is well known. STEM capabilities are key to economic progress, and in Africa we have very low numbers enrolling in STEM qualifications. Even the graduates we produce are not competent enough. But this is not just in Africa, this is a global phenomenon. Attracting and retaining STEM students is a worldwide problem, and one of the key reasons is the heavily theoretical curriculum that doesn't facilitate the kinds of practices required in real-world contexts. Our assessment approaches do not encourage students to experiment and fail, one of the key ways to really learn. Now, in response to the theory-practice divide, we've seen a shift towards more active learning approaches, problem-based learning, project-based learning, even workplace learning. But many of these approaches, whilst intuitively on the right track, only work in small, well-resourced environments, and they're not necessarily adequately theorized. A second dilemma is that more practical education can limit students' experience of technologies, for example, technologies which will no longer be relevant once the students actually graduate. We need a better way to understand what STEM is about and how to teach it, a way that will enable our graduates to legitimately participate in and contribute to our socioeconomic and technical challenges. I'm going to be using 21st century engineering as a focus today, since it represents a relationship between science, technology, and mathematics in society. Engineering offers us a way to conceptualize the theory-practice divide. Along with the health science disciplines, engineering embodies the fundamental expectation we have of our graduates, and that is to solve problems. I'm drawing on a synergy between three research projects. Firstly, my PhD and postdoctoral work on engineering problem solving in industrial sites. Now, this research looked at the relationship between physics, mathematics, and technology as practitioners solved real-world automation problems in socio-technical contexts. Now, this work led to a collaboration with two colleagues from Stellenbosch University. A concept paper on what a smart engineering curriculum looks like, given the rapid proliferation of technologies and cloud-based data management, and a paper on making STEM relevant in our African context. All this work draws on social realism, which postulates that although knowledge is emergent from social contexts, it's not reducible to those contexts. In other words, knowledge has properties and organizing principles of its own. And if we're to educate effectively, we need to understand those organizing principles. Now, the particular framework used by all three research projects is called Legitimation Code Theory. What or who legitimates a knowledge practice? One of its dimensions helps us to understand the difference between science, mathematics, technology, and society. The epistemic plane is a legitimation code theory tool that helps to differentiate between the what and how of any knowledge practice. The vertical axis is about what is being addressed in any practice, the phenomenon itself, how strongly bounded it is. In other words, recognized by all or having to be contextualized. For example, if I throw this pen up in the air and ask you, what phenomenon does this represent? You're all bound to say the word gravity. Now, that is an example of a strongly bounded phenomenon. It doesn't matter what we call it. It is what it is. It has an identity in and of itself. The horizontal axis on the epistemic plane is about how we approach any phenomenon, using fixed, standardized approaches or more open-ended approaches. Now, each of these quadrants represents a fundamentally different way of thinking. Now, the top right is about clearly bounded phenomena with standardized procedures. This is what we would call scientific. Now, the bottom right quadrant represents ways of thinking dictated by methods. The method is more important than the thing it's addressing. The top left quadrant is about a fixed, accepted phenomenon where the situation dictates what method or that multiple methods could be applied. The bottom left quadrant is about a practice where the phenomenon isn't clear and neither is the approach, either because nobody knows what's going on or the practice itself is dictated by different organizing principles, such as those determined by the players in the field themselves, or knowers in Legitimation Code Theory language. Now, our core STEM disciplines can be mapped onto this plane, where the central organizing principle of that particular discipline is dominated by a particular kind of insight, a particular way of thinking. Now, what we know from over a decade of research is that successful problem solving draws on all the insights, in other words, all the quadrants on the epistemic plane, in an iterative, non-linear fashion. Now, here are examples from my industrial case studies of mapping practitioners' approaches to analysis of and solutions to particular technology-based problems in industry. Now, you will note that the different colors on the problem-solving patterns actually represent different disciplines. The maps show us at what stage, what kind of disciplinary knowledge the engineering practitioner actually draws on during the problem-solving process. Now, using this research and the findings and this principle of iterative code shifting, my colleague, Professor Tinus Boysen, and I analyzed the elements of a 21st century smart engineering curriculum. Now, when we look at physical systems, the dominant discipline is physics. And this is a discipline that is built or that follows a hierarchical structure. In other words, it's fairly strongly bounded with new findings in physics constantly building on previous ones. And we tend to teach this in a fairly structured, linear, hierarchical fashion. Now, as we move up in the smart engineering curriculum towards the software and data space, we increasingly shift towards what we call weaker forms of disciplinary knowledge. Weak because these forms rapidly change and become redundant, as opposed to the more stable natural science forms we teach. Mathematics is the language that connects these two forms or kinds of knowledge. So as you can also see, the more we move into the technology space, the more complex the systems become. Now, when we analyze this smart engineering curriculum using the epistemic plane and from an education perspective, we see that the ways of thinking needed or insights should move progressively towards the left, towards more open-ended and contextual approaches. Now, if we know that effective and problem solving is about iterative code shifting, let's use our epistemic plane as a means to anchor and connect the different STEM disciplines. And literature tells us that higher education focuses on the right-hand side of this plane, while industry needs left-hand side capabilities. So if we are to, in fact, produce the problem-solving practitioners that we need, as educators, we ourselves need to begin to code shift. We need to look for opportunities to not only anchor the principles and procedures entailed in the natural sciences, but to locate these in relation to the numerous possibilities for application and how they matter to society. Here is an example of a colleague applying code shifting in mathematics, where she designed an exercise to help students grasp the significance of differential equations. She linked these to a particular physics example, and students had to work in groups to find and analyze an object in their immediate environment which could be identified using a specific differential equation. One student reported, "I had no idea you could see mathematics in the real world." Now, there are numerous examples in our Stellenbosch engineering faculty of code-shifting teaching strategies relevant to technology and the logic-based sciences, from the use of applications to enable students to practice different kinds of programming, to an approach to optimizing project-based learning. Now finally, if we as educators are to code shift, the one thing we need to do is shift to a broader and less Eurocentric view of the STEM curriculum. Now this is drawn from a paper presented by my colleague Ronaldo Rodriguez and I at the Stadio Multiversity conference earlier this year. Now we all know Einstein is famous for the equation that describes the relation between energy and mass, which led to the creation of the atomic bomb. But do we know that Samira Musa from Egypt developed the equation to break the atoms of cheap metals, making the medical applications of nuclear technology such as X-rays more accessible? Now, Samira organized the conference Atomic Energy for Peace and intended to spread the idea of using nuclear physics or atomic energy for helping humankind instead of weaponizing it. Newton, of course, is credited with much of the modern science and physics principles that underpin current-day technologies, and specifically the validation of theories through following what we call the scientific method. But did we know that Ibn al-Haytham documented his use of the scientific method 700 years before Newton? This man needs no introduction. It's the one thing that we stop our students from doing during our classes. But your very own Jamila Abbas from Kenya created an accessible, easy-to-use mobile platform that enables farmers to access real-time price information for specific crops in the regions in which they live. It is the first virtual marketplace for small-scale farmers in Kenya. The film Gorillas in the Mist made Diane Fossey, originally a biologist, famous. This is the woman who worked tirelessly to protect gorillas in the region between Rwanda and the DRC. Why are we not teaching about Wangari Maathai, also Kenyan, who also originally studied biology? She was the first African woman to win the Nobel Prize. She founded the Green Belt Movement, an environmental non-governmental organization focusing on the planting of trees, environmental conservation, and women's rights. Now, this is not to say that these contributors I've mentioned over here replace what it is that has preceded them in terms of this body of knowledge. We know that the Einsteins and the Newtons and the Faradays and all those big names have built collectively the very foundations of what we call the natural sciences. But in order for our students to be able to grasp these principles and to be able to contextualize them for themselves, why are we not drawing on a broader pool of all our contributors that stretch across our continents so that students can anchor their understanding through the possibilities of application that other scientists and other practitioners have engaged with? And this is the role I believe that we as ARUA need to play. We need to find collaborative ways to carry out the conceptual and contextual work that will truly empower this continent to produce the STEM professionals we need to address our collective challenges. Thank you.